Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to a new episode of Chatting with Lady C. Hello Mum, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, honey. How are you?
I'm very well.
Good.
That's nice.
Good.
So for today's episode, we're going to be talking about The Crown, and Mum's going to be talking about episode 5. So from there, Mum, it's all up to you.
Thank you, honey.
Nice.
Thank you. Well, the 5th episode of The Crown is entitled Fagan. Fagan is the person who got into the Queen's bedroom in 1982, and it caused a huge stir internationally. It is very interesting that Michael Fagan is still alive, and he has confirmed that nobody in that wonderful word that Meghan loves so much reached out to him from the Crown to ask him for his version of what really happened. Because you see, Michael Fagan and the Queen are really both extraneous to the realities of what the Crown intends to portray. And I think this episode is quite disturbing in many ways. Again, it's all beautifully done. You can't fault the Crown for producing a beautiful stuff. Of course, Buckingham Palace is Lancaster House. I mean, every time they do a scene, I think, oh gosh, there we go again. But I mean, the public wouldn't know that. So anyway, so shall I plunge in? The very first thing is the program starts out with genuine news footage. So it sets the tone brilliantly because we are now locked into a reality. So then Michael Fagan goes into the Queen's bedroom, ultimately. But before getting into any of that, let me say, why does Olivia Colman have to play the Queen as so glum, or with what the Queen herself calls her Miss Piggy face? Do you remember Miss Piggy? Miss Piggy was a cartoon character.
I do, yes.
Okay. And the Queen's natural, when she's not smiling, she says it's her Miss Piggy face. Well, Olivia Colman, you'd never know that the Queen was actually a very witty, entertaining, sociable, rather dynamic woman, but not dynamic in an overly assertive way, but full of energy, full of beans, full of humour. None of this ever comes across. So anyway, let's plunge in. Fagan wakes up, and there's a very well set scene. If you are a crypto-Marxist or somebody who thinks that Lenin should be admired for his beliefs but not his policies. Because let's face facts, people who are crypto-Marxists don't get that Lenin promised the peasants of Russia land, never gave them any land, stole the land they had from them, and shipped tens of millions of them across the Russian states into gulags where he worked them to death. So let's be very clear about what democratic socialism, as some people would call it, and as others would call it, Marxism or communism, is all about. Now, I have to say that Peter Morgan's political sympathies have got to be extreme left of centre, because if they are not, he is either utterly irresponsible as a filmmaker or then he has absolutely no scruples and conscience and doesn't care as long as he is going to bank the bucks. I don't know what it is because I don't know the man. But certainly I do know that he's at any turn, anything that's centrist or right-wing is completely twisted. And anything that's left-wing, no matter how twisted, is glorified. And this is becoming more and more of a theme. But he's very good. He's very clever. He's very bright. And I think you'd have to really be very on the ball to see where he gets in the bits of poison. So anyway, Fagan, there's a brilliant scene where Fagan wakes up and he's very annoyed because the radio is on and Mrs. Thatcher is giving a speech to the people saying that the way for them to prosper is to better themselves through work. And this is anathema to the Fagan character and is clearly anathema to Mr. Morgan, because at every turn he makes it absolutely clear that people should be handed everything on a plate. Well, I'm pretty sure that he's not handing anybody any of his money on a plate. You can tell. So they then have Fagan going to the dole queue, and it's really quite a funny scene of Fagan, and it happens more than once, because the woman behind the counter, of course, she's obliged to ask him certain questions. And it's almost as if she has no right to ask him if he's done any work. And you can see that they're aiming to create sympathy against the powers that be. But Fagan is actually quite funny in the scene about it. All invented, of course. It's everything. All of this is invented. The whole thing is virtually an invention. I mean, it's actually quite shocking that people can get away with making a movie about living people, and they are put into situations and say things that they never said and most likely would never have said. Anyway, the message in the Fagan exchanges and Mrs. Thatcher's intercut, and it's all done also out of time. It doesn't gel in real time, because the Falklands War is still being played out in the background, and it's brought in every now and then, and I'll get to that a bit later. But in fact, the two things have nothing to do with each other at all, and didn't in terms of time. But what Peter Morgan seems to fail to understand is that the reason why Britain had gone from one of the richest countries on earth to one of the poorest countries in the First World was because we had had high taxation from 1945 until 1979. He would like to blame Mrs. Thatcher's policies for the depressed state of the country and the economy. And he does, to give him credit, have Mrs. Thatcher making the point that the medicine needs to be administered. But the sympathies are always against Mrs. Thatcher. Well, in fact, it is the socialist policies that drove England practically to bankruptcy. And it is Mrs. Thatcher's policies that have benefited England since then, and why we are now as prosperous as we are. The average person is now infinitely better off thanks to the shake-up that Mrs. Thatcher did. But I'm coming to that in a second. There's a pub scene where Fagan is portrayed as little better than an animal. And this is really to explain away various things. It's well done, but I find it disturbing that on the one hand, Fagan, who they never got in touch with, who they could easily have asked what had happened and who would have cooperated with them, and I'm sure who could have done with the £10,000 or £20,000 that had they not been so mean, they would have given him for his cooperation. But they've trousered the money. They trousered the money. They didn't get in touch with him. And there's a pub scene where Fagan is portrayed as little better than an animal. There's an excellent scene with the Queen and Prince Philip right afterwards, where they are going to a garden party at Buckingham Palace. And the interchange is really very good. It's, again, of course, pushing the left-wing policies, but this time it's pointing out with accuracy that the Queen and Prince Philip were actually rather centrist in their views. In fact, Prince Philip was very pink. And this is one of the problems that the Queen had at the beginning of her reign, where Lord Mountbatten's well-known socialist tendencies and where Lord Mountbatten's well-known sympathies for the left wing and Lady Mountbatten's rabid socialism, and in fact she actually was also a bit of an anti-monarchist, which is a joke. But there's a hint of this there, but it's just hinted at that the Queen and Prince Philip are a bit centrist, because later on in this same episode, Prince Philip is on more than one occasion portrayed as being a right-winger, which he never was, and that he's very inhumane, which he never was. Prince Philip has always had a great deal of sympathy for the underdog, because he was an underdog. His parents were underdogs. His mother was mentally ill and deaf, and all of this impacted upon his personality in the most profoundly positive way. He is a very sympathetic person. None of this comes across, incidentally. But the garden party scene is brilliant, because it shows how eager everybody is to speak to the Queen and to see the Queen and Prince Philip and the rest of the royals, and it's real. It captures the reality of royal occasions brilliantly. Then we get back to Fagan. Fagan is the thread throughout all of this, and of course the episode is his name. Again, another dull scene. So Mrs. Thatcher is basically being blamed for the fact that from 1945 to 1979, Britain had socialist policies and therefore ran out of money. I mean, it's just farcical. Then they have the Queen trooping the colour, and again the Queen troops the colour in the wrong uniform. I mean, you know, if there's supposed to be so accurate and they're supposed to have thrown so much money at this, why can't they get a basic little thing like that right? Then they have a really very good scene of Fagan, who's out of work, who is trying to get work so he can do up his flat so that his children will be allowed to visit him. And we get into a brilliant scene where Fagan is caught up in a bureaucratic nightmare and he's now thrashing around for help. In one scene, he goes to his MP and he's obviously being portrayed as a very chippy oik. And that seems to be admirable in the circumstances, although I wouldn't have thought it was admirable full stop. But I suppose it's meant to portray the anger of the dispossessed. And, you know, there's this scene with him and his MP where he becomes increasingly aggressive and the MP is shown as being ineffectual. Well, again, I actually think that a lot of the problems of modern society is the over-regulation of certain aspects of it. I mean, this place cost me well into 6 figures more than it should have, just wasted on bureaucracy and bureaucratic intervention. And I do know from my own personal experience aside from this, and through other people who speak to me, that very often the over-regulation of society has the absolute opposite effect of what is intended, which is presumably that the people will benefit from the regulations. What usually happens is the state benefits and the employees of the state benefit, but the people for whom the rules were supposedly created do not benefit. But it takes a nuanced understanding of politics and of regulatory systems and of the world as it is nowadays to actually see through that. So now Mr. Fagan is very disaffected. He's really angry. He can't get help from anywhere, and he now breaks into the palace. And it's very well done, him breaking into the palace. What's not so well done is that Fagan is not caught, but the break-in is noted, and the Queen, incredibly, says, "Oh, don't tell the powers that be, because we don't want anybody knowing about this." In other words, the government. Because, well, none of that ever happened, but this is a clever way of making the Queen responsible for what happened. In fact, what happened was there was inaction because they didn't know he'd broken in. He broke in, he got away with it, he left, no problem whatsoever. Later on, they found out down the line that he had broken in twice, but he by then had broken in twice. But it's not enough to have him get away with it, you know. I mean, again, we get back to the whole business with this series of why is not the truth good enough? When, I mean, it shows that Fagan was lucky, the security at the palace was inept, and he got away with it. But no, they have to create this completely false scenario where the Queen is now going to be blamed for the fact that Fagan gets in a second time because she has embarked upon a cover-up. Also, to pile insult upon injury, who is dealing with the fact that the Queen is hushing up this break-in? Martin Charteris, who by this time has left the palace for 5 years and is safely ensconced at Eton as the provost. Oh dear, oh dear. Then there is a very disturbing scene of Fagan fighting with his wife's boyfriend and then being denied access to his children. And it's very disturbing. It's uncalled for. I mean, you know, Fagan is clearly not even a human being to these people. He's just a vehicle for moving the narrative on. Then they now have another fiction, which is Mrs. Thatcher informing the Queen that she is going to be taking, Mrs. Thatcher, can't hang around any longer because she's off to take the victory parade now that the Falklands War has been won. But when the Falklands War was won, the Queen is the one, as the head of state, who was there for the service of Thanksgiving. And when the next set of celebrations came about, the Queen was on an official tour, so she couldn't have taken them. But not her. Mrs. Thatcher is obviously a very pushy, sort of inhumane woman who informs the Queen, oh, well, you know, sorry, baby girl, you know, I mean, I suppose she's laying the ground for Meghan to be able to say to the Queen, sorry, baby girl, you know, you just need to remember your place, you know, you're just the Queen. Okay. But then they portray Mrs. Thatcher having run her into the ground to move the story on in terms of her tremendous accomplishment, and it was a tremendous accomplishment, wresting back the Falkland Islands from the Argentinians. They have this scene where Mrs. Thatcher is portrayed splendidly, and you can actually almost feel them saying, my God, why do we have to do this? But we gotta move the story on, we gotta move it on, and we've gotta give credit where it's due. Drat it. Anyway, another detail. The sentry boxes are now outside of the fencing at Buckingham Palace. And then later on, they're going to be inside. So the sentry boxes obviously have a life of their own throughout this whole series. Sometimes they're where they are, and other times they're where they used to be before the Second World War. But since nobody at Netflix can make up their mind which it should be, they're doing both. Then they have a really preposterous scene between the Queen and Fagan, the second time he breaks in. Now, Fagan has said that when he broke into the Queen's bedroom, she immediately got up and left him, and then he was apprehended. They don't have this. They have they have Mikhail Ulyanov Fagan, younger brother of Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, otherwise known as Comrade Lenin, giving the Queen a lecture. I will admit the Queen comes across as quite decent and sensible, and she comes across reasonably sympathetic. But this is the opportunity for them to give the public, especially I'm sure the American public, a lecture as to why the old established order should be got rid of, and everybody should awake enough to be woke, so that the new established order, where everybody can be a raindrop and feed the earth, and the earth will take care of itself as long as we take care of it, because it is there for us to admire, not because we're a part of nature. And all this woke rubbish that is so prevalent nowadays. Fagan is given many an opportunity to lecture us on why capitalism is an evil system and socialism is a better system. Except I'm astonished that Peter Morgan would even think like this, because his previous father-in-law had many of his properties confiscated when Czechoslovakia was communist. I have lived under true socialism when Michael Manley was in power. I have been to Russia when it was communist. I've been to Russia since it was communist. I've been to Cuba before it was communist. I've been to Cuba since it was communist. Do you remember Cuba?
Yeah, it was great.
It wasn't it?
Great, yeah.
But do you remember any time a waiter came over to take our order and was saying something to us, within 30 seconds, someone else would be right there to monitor the situation?
No, I can't remember that.
Complete lack of freedom. Complete lack of freedom.
We were enjoying ourselves too much.
Well, yes,
we
you
were kids
children
anyway,
were
so.
having a good time, and we were there to have a good time.
Yeah.
But I wasn't
And when
blind.
Yeah, because you're adults, we're kids, we're not really looking out for that. We're looking out for good food, swimming pools and stuff like that.
But I wasn't blind to the oppression of the people. And what people need to understand is that true socialism oppresses the people. I think socialized capitalism is the ideal system. Rampant capitalism is not a good system. Socialism is not a good system, but a centrist system that is basically capitalist is what has been responsible for the prosperity. To go back to the program, the Queen makes her exit. Fagan is duly apprehended, and he is duly charged with breaking and entering, and he is declared insane, and he's released after 3 months. So it was a nice patch-up. The Queen, actually, I am told, begged for him. And Prince Philip, who is portrayed now, there's an exchange about Fagan, and Prince Philip is portrayed as this dyed-in-the-wool reactionary who has absolutely no sympathy for the man. It's completely untrue. It is completely untrue. Prince Philip had far more sympathy and did far more good for the disadvantaged in this country with the creation of things like the Duke of Edinburgh's awards scheme and his work for the environment. He's one of the fathers of the ecological movement, than Peter Morgan will ever do. Peter Morgan has done no good that I can see for anybody in this country except sow dissension where this series is concerned. I think had he stayed closer to the truth and had he not been pushing a very negative political message and using living people in such a way that he grossly misuses and misrepresents their political persuasions, because both the Queen and Prince Philip are very centrist. They are centrists, they always were. They used to be called, especially Prince Philip was called Pink when he was young. The Queen was always very careful to make sure that nobody could say she was anything, but in her actions it became apparent that she was very centrist and she loves her people. And Prince Philip did a great deal of good for the people, not only of this country, but of the world. And I think it's really quite shocking that he is portrayed as a reactionary when he never was. And on that note, I think I've said enough.
Well, I have to say something. I hope your followers enjoy you, because I've got a great feedback, because I went to London this weekend and I saw a few friends, and I had some friends of mine heard that you were doing it about the Crown, and they actually went and looked at it and said they loved it because they're watching the Crown, of course. And by watching your videos, they didn't realize what was true and what was fake, so they were just going on it, like we were saying from the very start of these videos that we've been doing, that people would just go there and think it's all real. And by looking at your video, and now we're on to the 5th, so the 4 before, they're loving it because they can actually see the difference. And then they can watch it and then watch your video and see what compare it and see the truth and their opinions from your side, and they love it.
Well, thank you, honey. I find that very encouraging, because I don't do these things to exercise my voice. I mean, I really don't. I do them because I think they serve some useful purpose, and that people want them and people will benefit from them. I mean, knowledge is a wonderful thing. The truth sets you free. There is nothing to beat the realities, even when the realities are unpleasant. And all realities have downsides as well as upsides. So I'm glad you said that, because it means I'm not wasting my time totally. I gather also that 1 or 2 people have said in the comments that down the line, people will be able to look at these videos and say, no, we see where that was true and that wasn't. It provides a reference point historically down the line. And if it does that, good, because that's all I aim to do. I have no axe to grind one way or the other, really. My sympathies are with the royal family, because I know from my own personal observation and experience and knowledge that they are basically, by and large, decent people trying to do a job of service for the nation. And in the case of the Commonwealth, for the Commonwealth.
It's like the last thing you were just talking about Prince Philip.
Mm.
Like, it's nasty to say stuff about that to him because he is one of the main people that has done so much for this country and various other countries. Just Windsor Castle, when it burnt down, the Queen's supposed to look after that. He was like, no, 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 no. I'm going to take control of it, and did everything, and she didn't have to even stress about it. He takes so much commitment to himself, even at his elderly age, and does it. So it's nasty, like, from the beginning that we said on these videos, is that they're making them look bad.
And he's a wonderful man. He's a wonderful man who's done the very best he could in a sometimes difficult situation,
Very difficult.
but nevertheless with great privileges. But he is a wonderful man. I mean, he has really knocked himself out and cared about humanity. And for him to be portrayed as an inhumane creature, it's just awful. It's awful, you know. And I think on that note, I should say thanks for saying that. It really means a lot to me. And thank you all for the ones of you who've sent in the comments to say that you think that this will have historic significance down the line. Well, it's certainly, unless they're burnt, which I don't think they will be. I think they are there. They will form a part of the record. And I would like to say...
And we got backups.
Yes. But I would like to say that it's, you know, my only thing as somebody who is truly interested in history and really in humanity is it's only through the truth that we will ever profit from experience. We do not profit from lies, we profit from the truth. And everything I write and everything I say, and you know, in my personal life, everything I do is with the idea in mind that we are all souls on this journey in a timed existence, hopefully an eternal existence, where we will be judged on the quality of our souls. That means what we have within us and what we express externally and how we perform as human beings. And I think, well, my contribution, hopefully, is to shed a bit of light in the corners where there's not that much light, you know, and just speak the truth as in how I find it. But it's amazing, the resistance in this world to the truth, you know. It's just astonishing. And, you know, I mean, I'd have no axe to grind where the Crown is concerned if they simply put up disclaimers saying, these are works of fiction which have used true events and living people to create a drama, or words to that effect.
Like they do, like parental guidance or stuff like that, warnings.
Yeah. That's all they needed to do, but they haven't done it. And I think it is my duty and the duty of everybody who values the truth and values fair play, because it's not fair to people like Prince Philip or the Queen or even Mrs. Thatcher. She's dead and gone. But still, you know, the woman, and as I said, when she was alive, I didn't particularly like her on the occasions I met her, but I'm not blind to the good she did. I mean, give credit where it's due. And on that note, I will say thank you very much for listening. I hope you have enjoyed this, and keep the questions coming in. Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody, and we hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, hit the like button, subscribe and share with your friends. Thank you very much and goodbye.